The crisis in West Asia, it appears, might be coming to an end, but it appears that the ceasefire between Israel and Iran is extremely tenuous and the overall terms of the agreement are still unclear. The impact of this has been lingering, not just for millions of people across the region, but also potentially for economic reasons and on economic grounds. It's one of two major wars or major conflicts which persist across the world. Martin Wolf is one of the finest economists in the world in terms of his thinking on economic ideas. I've had the privilege of speaking to him a couple of times in the last few years, and he's here in New Delhi, which is all the more reason to speak to him now. Thank you very much for being with us.
It's a pleasure.
It's a difficult situation around the world in the Middle East, and who knows what's going to finally happen. If things don't resolve, what is the potential economic impact in terms of oil flows?
Well, the first thing to stress is I don't know, and we really don't know. This is an incredibly uncertain situation. At the moment, with what's happened so far, as I can see, the impact is going to be quite modest, well within the range of the sort of mild turbulence we get in energy markets, and certainly not of huge global significance. It's important to remember the oil economy isn't as important as it used to be 50 years ago or so during the first and second oil shocks, so it shouldn't matter that much unless the shock to prices is enormous. So the question ultimately, and actually I wrote about this in a column published immediately after the terrorist assault from Hamas in Israel a couple of years ago, a bit less, that it depends exactly on what you're talking about. Could it spread to the Gulf? Could it mean real attacks on oil fields, and particularly the closure of the Straits of Hormuz, through which an enormous proportion of the world's oil, about 30% or so, goes? At the moment, it seems very clear that everybody's aware of the risk. The US is imposing a lot of pressure to prevent that happening. Yeah. It's been, I think, pretty clear to Iran that if it did this, it would attract the ire of all the world's powers. The Chinese will be immensely upset. Obviously, the Gulf states will be upset. The Americans will be furious. So I think the Iranians are being very careful not to do that. The Israelis certainly don't want to be blamed for this. So strangely for me, I'm actually relatively optimistic that it will be contained short of that. But I would always stress one can never be sure.
Just in terms of the broader situation between Israel and Iran, how do you assess where this has gone? Has anybody won or has anybody lost?
Well, first of all, I'm not an expert in geopolitics, and I always stress this. I have colleagues who are, and I do the geoeconomics, so I've discussed this. I think that the Israeli view would be that they have, in the short run, won in the sense that they've penetrated Iran's defenses. They've degraded them significantly. They've killed a great number of people they regard as mortal enemies, and they have weakened Iran's medium-term position, not just short-term, in terms of its ability to obtain nuclear weapons. So they, I think, will feel very strongly, certainly Bibi Netanyahu will feel this has been a success. And if you look at it in the wider context, a couple of years ago, they seemed to be surrounded by Iran's proxies, very strong position in Syria, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, and that all seems to have gone away. So from Israel's point of view, the military actions are bound to look successful. The Americans, too, will probably be quite happy with the claim, though it's challenged even by their own intelligence operations, that they have damaged, if not destroyed, at least much of Iran's nuclear potential. But is this an enduring outcome? Very unlikely. Iran is still there. Iran is probably even more determined. I see no obvious reason to suspect that the regime will collapse. It seems far more likely that the Revolutionary Guard will become the dominant element. That could go on for decades. Will they try to get another rebuild the nuclear program? I would guess yes, because They will see that's the way to be secure. Will that lead to more confrontations with Israel and the US? Quite likely. So I suspect it's in no way definitive. While Israel and the US have sort of got their short-term aims, at least Israel has, this is not going to resolve this conflict, which requires a general peace in the Middle East, which does look further away than ever.
Some would suggest that a peaceful solution to Russia and Ukraine is perhaps nowhere in sight either at this stage. That has a profound economic impact in so many levels. The price of food grain, for example, which was coming out of Ukraine, that continues to be impacted. Another strand for us in India, which is important, of course, is fuel flows. We continue to import oil from Russia, and our foreign minister always gets asked that, look, why are you doing this? And Russia is the aggressor. But he keeps on pressing home the one point that, look, we have to think about India first. We have a huge population, a huge set of requirements in terms of energy. Is that an argument that is increasingly accepted?
Well, I think at least, even if it's not accepted, and I remember appearing on a television program in India shortly after the initial war, if it's not accepted, it's tolerated. The Western powers have recognized from the beginning that India has its own interests. It's an extremely important player strategically, including for the West, and they don't want a confrontation over this. So it's accepted. And this is even more obvious now when the US and the Europeans are really, to some degree, at loggerheads. The US doesn't have any clear strategy towards the resolution of this war. Trump's boast that he would settle it within the first day is obviously proven, as we expected, to be absurd. I don't know what they're trying to do there. The Europeans want to sustain Ukraine. Will that work? How will the war resolve itself? We don't know the answers to any of these questions. So India can, I think, be perfectly comfortable pursuing the policy it is. But my suspicion is that the war will continue without a resolution. Russia isn't going to win in the sense of collapsing Ukraine completely. At the same time, Ukraine has no chance of defeating Russia. How could it? It's just a horrible running sore and a tragedy for the people of Ukraine. But I think it looks to me as though, as it were, the geopolitical significance, the points you made, isn't going to get any worse. I can't see why it was. Now, the terrible truth about the world that we live in is we can live with ongoing wars in which lots of people are killed because we can live with them. And that's increasingly what both these conflicts look like to me, though the Iran-Israel one is more sensitive because the oil flows are more sensitive. So the outcome is, it seems to be just another of these ongoing conflicts, which we tend not to think about very much. Look at Sudan.
No, I know. It's a huge problem over there. I wanted to ask you a little bit about trade equations between America and the rest of the world. Obviously, there's a great deal of pressure. America is dealing with different countries. Some would suggest in different ways. There's this particular equation with China and talks in one direction. Talks with India as well. Do you believe that there will be a comprehensive India-US trade deal which would potentially resolve some of the concerns which primarily America seems to have?
Well, first of all, I think the American trade policy that is now being pursued is ludicrous, intellectually insupportable, and it will not achieve the result it wants, which is a massive reduction in all its external deficits, both bilateral and overall, because that's an intellectual error. It's not due to trade policy, it's due to macroeconomic imbalances, which I've discussed in recent columns, and Mr. Trump simply doesn't get this. It is so in some fundamental way, this trade policy will fail to achieve its objectives, and it's certainly not going to reindustrialize America. It might increase employment in manufacturing in America by a couple of percentage points. It will still continue to decline. So it's really nonsense. And one must add, it's completely illegal under the World Trade Organization rules, so it's behaving like a rogue power. Now, given that, and India must deal with the realities, it does seem to me more likely that they will reach a good deal with India than pretty well anywhere else, except they've got a pretty good deal with the UK.
That's true.
And that Mr. Trump takes these things very personally. He rather likes the UK. He likes the UK royal family. He's a bit snobbish about that. And he obviously likes Mr. Modi and regards India as a friendly country. And he would like to reach a deal. And the Americans don't, at least at the moment, really worry about Indian competition and competitiveness. They don't think of India as anything like China. And of course, 10 years from now, I've said this before, 10 or 20 years from now, they may, if India is successful, view it very differently. But now they look at it favorably. So I assume there will be a deal. I have no idea what sort of deal it will be, but I imagine it will be an agreement which allows relatively liberal trade on both sides, creates some opportunities for India vis-a-vis other countries, because clearly the barriers to exports from China will be higher. That will be very friendly. Maybe even the barriers to Vietnam will be higher. So this could be an important opportunity for India. But I should qualify, there's a history here. Mr. Trump has reached deals before. In his first term, he reached a very good deal, he himself said, with Mexico and Canada. And the first thing he did this time is blow it up. So you can't trust it. And that's important, because in trade policy, you want the deal to be so secure that business will invest large amounts of money to exploit the opportunities. And it's unlikely that most businesses will feel that is really secure, because Mr. Trump can withdraw what he has delivered. He doesn't worry very much about what he's signed because he lives in the day.
That's true. You briefly mentioned Europe and America. I was at the Munich Security Conference where America, essentially J.D. Vance pulled the rug under the feet of Europe, redefined the nature of NATO and the equation, the military equation between America and Europe. One of the big demands of the US president is that GDP spending or spending on defense as a percentage of GDP across Europe needs to go up substantially, that America will no longer necessarily protect Europe against Russia in quite the same way as it's done in the past. How is the UK, France, Italy, and let's say Germany placed? How are they placed in actually doing that? To the extent that America as a military player in Europe could actually see a reduced role?
Well, this is a huge question. First of all this has been quite clearly a huge shock to the Europeans. Not completely a surprise, but the extent of it was a surprise. The hostility, particularly from J.D. Vance, was certainly striking. We never expected him to come and basically support the extreme right. Many Europeans regard as neo-fascists, in my view, correctly. So that's all a big shock. And then we saw the extraordinary film of their confrontation with Mr. Zelensky in the White House. So these are huge shocks. Now they're working very hard to reach a new deal. The NATO meeting at the moment, very recently. And people are falling over themselves to say we're going to raise defense spending to 5% of GDP. I don't believe that will ever happen. It's higher than the US has. I think that's a fantasy. I don't know where the money will come from. But certainly people are aware that they are going to have to rely on themselves. They're going to have to build up their militaries. And the most striking case is Germany, which has basically scrapped its restriction on debt. It's going all out to borrow. And Germany is potentially the most powerful military entity for obvious reasons in size, economic development. And of course, it is important to stress, if we leave aside nuclear weapons, which Russia has a gigantic arsenal which dates from Soviet days, which the Europeans will not match. But in other areas, if you look at the European economy, it's vastly bigger than the Russian economy, much more sophisticated. It should really be quite comfortable to match the conventional weaponry of Russia. If you look that Ukraine can hold the Russian army and it's killed vast numbers of Russians, I think the Europeans can feel plausibly confident that as long as the nuclear umbrella survives, and that's the key thing from America, the conventional forces can be balanced perfectly well by the Europeans in a few years. And I think the Europeans have sort of got that, and I expect it to happen. So if the Americans allow 4 or 5 years, this will work. But one should emphasize, and we had an article in the in the FT just today by Lloyd Austin, the former Secretary of Defense under Mr. Biden, former general.
Yes.
He said, it will be very inefficient for us all to go on our own. The cooperation and using our complementary skills between the US and Europe is important for both of us, and we shouldn't give that up. Does Mr. Trump understand that? Does this administration understand that? That's a very big question. But basically, I think in conventional terms, over time, the Europeans can unquestionably achieve a reasonable balance against Russia.
A final question, since you are here in India, we have huge aspirations of becoming a developed nation by 2047. Some say that's unrealistic. The government says that no, one way or the other, it is going to happen. We have a huge demographic dividend, which is a good thing. We've got a young population. But I think the larger question is on whether we are optimally using that young population. And the reason I say so is because a young population has to be skilled and reskilled. The nature of the economy is changing. I won't ask you a hackneyed question on AI and growth. I will, however, ask you about the importance of reskilling to meet India's ambitions of becoming a developed nation.
Well, it's a very, very good question. So I delivered a lecture here based on an article I wrote for a book in honor of a very dear friend of mine, Shankaracharya. So so my answer to this, I do think it is plausible, nothing is certain, that by 1947 India will be a great power by any definition.
2047.
2047, sorry. What did I say? 1947. Sorry, I apologize. Slip of the tongue. 2047. It will be a superpower. I expect it to be very clearly the third largest economy in the world and a great power. That should happen, simply the combination of numbers with growth continuing at about the average, which is very much consistent of 6% a year or so, which India's had over the last 3 decades. That would not, in my calculations, there are differences. What is a developed country? There are different definitions. In my definitions, that wouldn't really make India a developed nation. But that's a matter of division. It would be an upper middle income country, but it would be a considerably bigger economy and more sophisticated than today. So does it matter? It wouldn't be precisely a developed country as I define it? Not really. Now, the question you're asking is, well, 2 questions. One, can that be sustained? 6% a year for the next 20, 25 years? And what would... And the answer to that is, it is possible. India has always done a pretty poor job of skilling its population, but it still has got skilled, and there are so many Indians, and it is still so relatively poor that it seems to me, and there are so many more getting educated, that you will create, in all probability, sufficiently more skilled people to drive that sort of growth from this starting point, still relatively low, for another 25 years. You don't have to do much better than you have done before, though you do have to keep on skilling people. Of course, if you do more than you've done before, and as you suggest, do really better in skilling your whole and reskilling your population, providing through your firms and through the government, really higher levels of education and continuous skilling, you could do even better. And I've always felt India could grow at 8% a year. And if that happened, you would definitely become developed. So, but 6% or so seems to me manageable with a continuation of the past performance, which obviously means that you continue to pull more and more women into the labor force, you got them more and more skilled, you extend education, high quality education throughout the whole labor force, and that would mean continued improvement.
Martin Wolf, wonderful to see you in Delhi, and thank you very much for joining us here on NDTV. Thank you very much indeed.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks.